Okay, welcome everyone. We are now going to do Module 9 Homework 2. Module 9 Homework 2 is about finding the equation of a line. Now, the equation of a line means a formula that every point on the line satisfies. For example, suppose we have a line, and let's say this line goes through the point 1, 8. Now, we don't know anything else about the line. We just know it goes through the point 1, 8. Then the equation of that line must be some equation so that when we plug in 1 for x and 8 for y, it makes it true. Now, I'm just going to make up some equations. We don't know the equation of this line. Maybe this equation is y equals 8x. Notice that if you plug 1 in for x and 8 in for y, it makes it true. Or maybe the equation of that line is x plus 7. Notice that when you plug 1 in for x and 8 in for y, it's true. So the equation of a line is an equation that every single point on that line makes true. So if this was really the equation of that line, then every single point that I can find on that line would have to make that equation true. Okay, let's take a look at this first line here. To find the equation of a line, it turns out there's a nice formula, is a nice form of a line, and it is called the point slope form of a line. That's a very helpful way to write a line if you're trying to find its equation, called the point slope form of a line. And point slope form is written in the following way. Now I'm going to write it, I'm going to erase a little bit of it, and then I'll replace it in a second. It is y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. Okay, I'm going to replace the y sub 1. Well, I'm not going to replace it, but I'm going to write it in red. I'm going to write the m in red. And I'm going to write the x sub 1 in red. All of the things that are in red, those are things you have to find numbers for. All the things in black, they will stay as they are. You won't replace numbers for those things. Now, don't worry about what that means, but you will see as we go along. So you're going to replace the y sub 1, the m, and the x sub 1 with numbers when you're using this formula. Okay, we're going to find the equation of a line that has a slope of -3 and it goes through the point 1, 2. So m is -3. X sub 1, that means the x coordinate of any point that we know that's on the line. So x sub 1 is 1. Y sub 1 is also the y coordinate of any point on the line, but it's got to come from the same point that we just pulled the x sub 1 first from. So it would be 2. In other words, suppose I told you this line went through the point 1, 2, and let's say it also went through the point 25, 3000. Well, you can't make x sub 1 that and y sub 1 that. They both have to come from the same point. So you would either do 1 and 2 for x sub 1, y sub 1, or you would do 25 and 3000. And again, these guys are not really on that line. That's just an example. Okay, we now have all the pieces we need. We have the y sub 1, we have the m, we have the x sub 1. So we'll throw those into our formula. So again, our formula is y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. So this will become y minus 2, because y sub 1 is 2, equals m, which is -3, parentheses x minus 1, And we're done unless we're told to write the answer in a certain way. If we're told to write it in point-slope form, that's it. We're done. We're going to write it in slope-intercept form only because the problem says to do so. This, I remind you, is slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. To do that, you just follow the following steps. So we'll distribute the -3, getting -3x plus 3. We'll add 2 to both sides, and that will give us y equals -3x plus 5. And that is the answer to the question. Now, remember what I told you earlier. What does it mean for this to be the equation of that line? It means every single point on the line must make that equation true. And if you plug in 1 for x, and if you plug in 2 for y, you'll see that point does make it true. That is the equation. Now, in this case, since we know it has a slope of -3, our answer better have a slope of -3, and it certainly does. Okay, we're going to find the equation of the line going through these 2 points. Now, we were given a point, but we weren't given the slope, and we need slope for this. But fortunately, we know the slope formula. The slope formula says the slope is, let's call this point number 1. Let's call this point number 2. The slope formula is the y coordinate from point number 2 minus the y coordinate from point number 1 divided by the x coordinate from point number 2 minus the x coordinate from point number 1. Now, take a look at this for a moment. Think about the formula for slope. Y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. There's a minus in that formula. Very often, if the number that goes here happens to be a negative number, students will see this minus in there and they'll leave the negative out. You can't do that. Whatever goes after that minus sign there has to be the actual number. If it's negative, you have to keep the negative on there. So be careful about losing negatives here. So this becomes 7 over 1, and so the slope is 7. All you need to use this formula is the x and y coordinate from one point and the slope. And now we have that. So our equation is going to be y minus the y coordinate. Now, which one do we use? It's completely our choice. I'm going to use the first one just because I have all positive numbers in there. So y minus 3 equals the slope, which we figured out is 7, parentheses x minus the x coordinate. Now, which x coordinate do we use? Do we use 2 or do we use 1? Pause the video and think about that. Turn it on and I'll tell you. So remember what I told you earlier. Since we used the y coordinate of 3, you can't go reaching over here to get the x coordinate. The x has to come from the same point. So we use the x coordinate of 2. If the question said to put the answer in point slope form, we're done. That's it. That's the answer. But that wasn't the question. The question said to write the answer in slope intercept form. So just like last time, we need to convert it. We'll distribute the 7, getting 7x minus 14. We'll add 3 to both sides, getting y equals 7x minus 11. And that is the answer. And how would you check it? Now, you don't need to check it, but how would you check it? Let's go back. Remember, that equation tells us that if you plug in the x and y coordinates of that point into it, it will make it true. If you plug the x and y coordinates of that point into it, it will make it true. And you will see that both of those work. So that's the equation. There's our answer. Okay, take a second, read this to yourself. So We could do this problem the same way as the last two. We totally can if we want to, but you don't need to. Here's why. We know we have y equals mx plus b as one way to write this equation of a line. And since we already know the slope, and look at the point 012. The point 012 is right there. So we know the slope and we know the y-intercept. If you know the slope and the y-intercept, you can just put those in directly and the answer is y equals 1/2 x plus 12. And we're done. Now be careful. This is only a y-intercept because its x coordinate is 0. If that wasn't 0, you wouldn't have a y-intercept, and then you'd have to do other things. Now, could you use this formula? Totally. Let's use that formula. Y minus the y coordinate of 12 equals the slope, which is 1/2, parentheses x minus the x coordinate of 0. That's y minus 12 equals 1/2. Anything minus 0 is itself, so that's just x. And then add 12 to both sides, and we get the same answer we had a moment ago. We get 1/2 x plus 12. Okay, we're going to find the equation of the vertical line passing through that. Well, you may not remember, but the slope of a vertical line, and you're going to need slope for this formula, is undefined. That doesn't make this an impossible problem. What that does, though, is tell us there's no way in the world we're going to use that formula because you can't plug in undefined for m. That makes no sense. So what we're going to do is a skill that you definitely want to have, or a trick, let's say, that you definitely want to have in math. Give me 1 second. I need to do something. Sorry for the delay. Okay. The trick that you want to use in math sometimes is if you're ever stuck on a problem, if possible, draw a picture of it. Well, we have a vertical line going through 5, 7. Sorry, 5, negative 7. So there's 5, negative 7. We have a vertical line going through it. The question is to find the equation of that line. Well, if you remember what we said before, a vertical line's equation is always x equals wherever it crosses the x-axis, and we're done. There's our answer. That's pretty much the only way to do this. Okay. I said in Module 9, Homework 1, the previous section, that there was a problem students often think aren't going to show up on a test, and it often does. What I was thinking of actually was this one. So be sure you know how to do this. A problem similar to that very often shows up on a test. So here's the question. You've got a red line, you have a blue line. It says that the lines are perpendicular to each other. You know the equation of the red line, and the question is to find the equation of the blue line. Well, to find the equation of the blue line, you're going to need to use that formula. So we know that this is our formula. Now, what do we need when we use this formula? We need to find y sub 1, m, and x sub 1. Once we find those, we'll put them in, we'll simplify, and we'll be done. And when I say simplify, we'll put it in slope-intercept form because that's the way it's being asked to be put. Be careful. When it's asking for m and y sub 1 and x sub 1, since we're trying to find the equation for line 2, it has to be numbers that come from the blue line. Well, we do know something from the blue line. We know the x and y coordinates of a point. So we can write y minus 7 equals m times x minus 1. If we just knew the slope of the blue line, we'd be done. Well, it turns out that the slope of the blue line is negative 1/2. Now, why is it negative 1/2? Well, remember, two lines are perpendicular. Their slopes will be reciprocals, which is where the 1/2 comes from. And they will also be opposite signs. And the slope of this one is positive, so the slope of this one must be negative. So that means we have y minus 7 equals negative 1/2 x minus 1. All we need to do now is simplify this. Put it in slope-intercept form, and then we're done. Now, there's a couple ways to go to the next step. I'm going to show you the one students tend to make less mistakes with. So what I'm going to do is distribute the negative 1/2. That'll give me negative 1/2 x plus 1/2. Then, to make things simpler, I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of these denominators so I don't have to deal with fractions. That'll give me 2y minus 14 equals negative x plus 1. Notice the 2 is canceling these 2's there. And that's how I got negative x plus 1. Then I will add the 14 to both sides. That will give me 2y equals negative x plus 15. And at the very end, I will divide both sides by 2. When I do that, these will cancel, and I'll end up with y equals negative 1/2 x plus 15/2. Now, there are other ways you could have done this, and as long as you're getting that same answer, you're good. This is just one way that I could show you how to do that. So that is the equation of that blue line, which ironically I put in green, but that's the equation of the blue line. Okay, so we know y equals mx plus b. In other words, we know the slope-intercept form of a line. We also know y minus y1, that doesn't look very good, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. That is the point slope form of a line. Well, there's another form called standard form. Standard form looks like this, and it's got all sorts of rules for it. So we're going to look at some examples of standard form. This, by the way, is one example of standard form, but we need to look at some examples so you know the rules. Okay, rule 1. The x term has to come first. So this equation would not be in standard form. But if I take that equation and I just swap the order of those two things, I get 3x plus 2y equals 9. That's now the very same line, but now it is in standard form. So the first rule is the x term always has to come first. Y is not allowed to come first if we're going to be in standard form. The second rule, the x term has to have a positive coefficient. So this line is not in standard form. I can take that line, negative 5x plus 6y equals 1, and turn it into standard form by multiplying both sides by negative 1. When I do that, that'll give me 5x minus 6y equals negative 1, and that line is in standard form. These are both the very same line, but this one is written in standard form. Another rule about standard form is all of your numbers here have to be integers. And I remind you, integers mean positive or negative whole numbers. So the problem here is the 2/3. So we can take our equation here. We can multiply everything by 3. y3 because of that denominator of 3. These cancel. we will have 24x plus 2y equals 21, and that equation is in standard form. These are both the same line. That equation and that equation both give us the very same line, but this one is in standard form. Another rule, your three numbers cannot all have a common factor. So how can we take 4x minus 2y equals 10 and put it in standard form? By dividing out the common factor, which in this case is 2. That gives us 2x minus y equals 5. And that one is in standard form. Again, this one here and this one here, they're the very same line. If I were to graph this and then graph that, one would lie right on top of the other, the very same line. But the one circled here in green is in standard form. Okay. Take a moment, read this question, pause the video, try the entire thing, turn it back on, and I'll do it. Okay, so let's do it. We're trying to find the equation of a line that has that slope and goes through that point. Again, let's look at the point 0, 4. 0, 4 has an x coordinate of 0, a y coordinate of 4, which means it's right there, which means it's the y-intercept of our line, since we know the slope and the y-intercept. Now, if that did not have a 0 there, this would not be the y-intercept. But since we know the slope and the y-intercept, the equation is y equals 1/3 x plus 4. The question said to put it in standard form. Remember, standard form doesn't allow fractions, so I will multiply everything by 3. That's going to give me 3y. Those will cancel, equals x plus 12. Remember, standard form requires the x to go in front. That will give me negative x plus 3y equals 12. Remember, standard form does not allow a negative on the x. So I will multiply everything here by -1. And that will give me x minus 3y equals -12. And that is the equation of the line that has a slope of 1/3 and also goes through the point 0, 4. And I believe that's the end here. Yes, it is. So that is the end of Module 9, Homework 2.